All right, I guess we're going to get started. I'm Scott Nielsen. I work for the Labrador Institute, which is part of Memorial University. Most of you here know me, but tonight we are videoing the talk, and it's actually being broadcast live on YouTube as well right now. So for some people out there may not know who I am. So I'm Scott Nielsen. I'm an archaeologist. I also am on the board of directors for the new organization, the Newfoundland and Labrador Archaeological Society. Newfoundland and Labrador was one of the only provinces in Canada that didn't have an archaeological society. So some people in St. John's, Tim Rast, and a few other people down there took the initiative on to start. And I was elected to the board of directors, and I'm the only member in Labrador that's on the board of directors, I guess. But one of the things that we're doing is doing public outreach and things like that. We partnered with the Labrador Institute for tonight to host Chelsee Arbour giving her talk on the archaeology at Kamestastin. Chelsee's up here doing some work for me on a different project, so we decided to take the opportunity while she's here to have her give a talk. And I'll just, if anybody's interested in the Newfoundland and Labrador Archaeological Society, they can talk to me afterwards. Our mission statement is on the table over by the door, so people can check that out if they want. There's also membership forms there if anybody's interested in becoming a member. I'm not authorized to take money for your membership tonight, but we do have a website, which is the www.nlartsociety.ca. It's on the membership forms too, so you can just grab a form and take that with you if you're interested. And you can check out our website, and there's actually a PayPal option there as well, so you can either mail the membership in, or you can just pay for it online if you're interested. And if you're not interested in becoming a member, though, you can still follow the Archaeology Society webpage and see what we're up to, and then maybe down the road it might be something that you decide you want to do. So without further ado, I guess we'll call on Chelsee Arbour to give us a talk tonight. And Chelsea's talk, as I said, is entitled Archaeology at Kamestastin. And here she is.
Well, hi everyone. Thank you very much, Scott, for the wonderful introduction, and thank you all for being here tonight. As Scott said, my name is Chelsee, and I'm here to talk to you about some of the archaeology that goes on at Kamestastin and my role in it, or with the project. But first off, thank you to the Labrador Institute Speakers Series and the Newfoundland and Labrador Archaeological Society for having me here, and again for all of you lovely people for showing up. So the organization of the talk, I'm just to talk a little bit about the geographical context of Kamestastin, where it is, what type of vegetation it has, what type of animals, and then I'll go into the social landscape a little bit. And this kind of naturally evolves into a discussion of two organizations, the Chicabis Foundation and the Arctic Studies Center of the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., and their role in kind of developing an archaeology program there at Kamestastin. And this kind of also kind of evolves quite naturally into the archaeological context. And then finally, I'll give you guys some more information about how I fit into this larger project. I should probably mention at this point, though, that I'm currently at around the final phases of my data collection, so everything is still relatively preliminary, and I have a lot of analysis still left to do. So I'm only going to be talking a bit about what I kind of think is going on, and not so much about what I'm arguing is happening. So Kamestastin is located in the interior of the Quebec-Labrador Peninsula, kind of in the north. And it's the lake itself is a meteorite impact crater lake. And it's also located in the heartlands of the Moshwa Innu, who are the most northern of the Innu regional groups. And this is important for a number of reasons that I'll get to kind of briefly. But archaeological research, oh, sorry, this is the actual lake, Kamestastin Lake. Archaeological research at Kamestastin tends to occur in the spring, when the landscape is still in the last throes of the winter, and it goes onwards until the beginning of the mosquito season, which is kind of mid-June. So being on land for that long, and during a seasonal transition, really allows us to understand the different affordances that the land has at different times, and as well as how that affects kind of mobility and movement, either hindering it or enhancing it in different seasons. But in general, the vegetation is largely barren ground shrub and dwarf trees, with an abundance of moss and lichen and willow and red berries. And there's a large variety of animals as well. So black bear and fox and wolf, partridge, otter, beaver, porcupine, variety of fish including lake-locked Arctic char. And of course the seasonal migrants, which is goose and caribou. So caribou is really one of the main draws for people who have frequented the area kind of throughout the ages and who still go today. The region as a whole considers prominently within contemporary Mushwa Innu personal experiences, including the seasonal goose and caribou hunts, as well as within oral histories of contemporary generational memory, where people are born or have died in the area within the not-so-distant past, and of oral traditions that are embedded in myths and epic travel accounts that people still talk about today and that have been passed down over many generations. So today, a large number of people, predominantly from Nafashish, but also from Shiajit and Kawawa, Sept-Îles, St. Augustine, Lachamen, kind of frequent the Kamestastin area in the spring and fall, other times of the year as well, but like a big group of people kind of in those two seasons. And these trips are kind of linked to, but not only about the seasonal hunting of goose and caribou, but also to spend time with each other, to share stories, to teach children about life in Nutshmit or the country, and to be respectful to the animals by following certain protocols when dealing with their remains. And the archaeological presence at Kamestastin, for sure, was known to the people who go there for a very long time, but only became really on the archaeological radar of archaeologists in the late 1990s. And this happened because the Chickavis Foundation, which is an Innu nonprofit cultural heritage organization, wanted to build a cultural resource center at Kamestastin to serve as a base camp for ecotourism, but also for a variety of cultural heritage initiatives. And underneath the provincial legislation, it was required to have a cultural heritage and archaeological assessment prior to building. And so Dr. Stephen Loring from the Arctic Study Center of the Smithsonian Institution kind of came up and did that assessment, and it became really apparent very quickly that there was much more archaeological material in the area than had previously been thought. This kind of was the beginning of the alliance, or the research kind of initiative between Chickavis Foundation and the Arctic Study Center. Underneath the auspices of Innu Nation, and with support from Shiajit and Nafashish, they started a long-term archaeological and cultural heritage research initiative since 1999. And so these are, some of the people that I work more closely with today, but there are a large number of people. There's Stephen Loring from the Arctic Study Center, Tony Jenkinson, who happens to be in the audience, and Navia Tibush from Nafashish. And both Tony and Navia Tibush are part of the Chickavis Foundation. Whoops. Yes, too fast. So it became more and more apparent from work at Kamestastin, as well as my time there, spending time with people, was that what I've been told is that the archaeological signatures kind of represented by old campsites and artifacts on the ground and fire pits are the old Innu from long, long ago. So they are the people from the past from which the Innu today have come from, or they are the descendants of these generations of people who've been on the land prior. And so from 1999 onwards, really, the mandate at Kamestastin, the lack of work really has been one of collaboration, where the narrative of the past is at least attempted to be written from a more multivocal perspective, both indigenous and academic. And further, Kamestastin is considered to be a living landscape. It is not a wilderness devoid of human traces. It is populated by peoples, present-day peoples, and the presence of those who have gone before. It is a place crowded with stories, and these stories fill the minds of the people who frequent the area and are hinted at the archaeological traces that are all around the region. So as such, the Kamestastin region and the material traces of the past people are an important part of the story of Nutshmit. So here is a picture of on the east side of the lake where the cabins were built after 1998. So this is prior to the construction, and this is what it looks like today. So here's the Kamestastin Lodge and a variety of cabins. And it's also kind of where, when doing archaeology, it's kind of the base camp of where we stay. And slowly, shortly show you a map. So in this image, the cabins would be here. And if I just put one little tab down, I'll be talking kind of more concretely about these campsites in a few minutes. But you can see that we have to kind of go across the lake. This way, moving and working in the spring is much easier than any other time of the year because we can actually walk across the ice, or for most of the time we ski-doo, which is a very efficient and very fun way of doing archaeology. But there are points in the year, especially towards the tail end of our season, where the ice, we have to really be careful and monitor the ice because it could become unstable because of just depending on how cold the winter was, how kind of thick the ice is, and so on. So and that's going to become kind of one of the things that I talk about shortly at one of our sites. This does actually become a factor. But since 1999, the Archaeology Kamestastin has produced evidence of some 260 sites and find spots. They're not all listed here. These are just some of the earlier kind of sites and find spots that have been found. And they spanned, from 6,700 years ago to today. So that kind of suggests a continuous, although episodic, occupation of Kamestastin from the time of equalization to the present. Now, of these 160 sites, 39 are potentially maritime archaic sites, spanning a 2,700-year period, from 6,700 to 3,500 roughly, depending on how you read the radiocarbon dates. The maritime archaic period, or the maritime archaic people are known as the first people of Labrador and Quebec, Lower North Shore, and of Newfoundland. And you start to see their archaeological signature in Labrador at 8,500 roughly. And kind of they continue until 3,500, or provincial wisdom says they continue until 3,500. So we really do have a nice span of occupation from this time period. But the maritime archaic doesn't translate well into Innu, so the should give us foundation in your study center. A way of talking about this time period that refers to kind of Innu of old Innu of long ago. That would be the, and I really hope I pronounced this properly, the Chioash Innu. So this was kind of a term that was made to kind of mitigate against unnecessary confusion and disassociation during cultural heritage programs at Kamestastin, but also as a reference to the possible cultural connections between the earliest Amerindian peoples of this region and present-day Innu. And I think this is an important distinction that I do kind of make throughout my research. So, go back to the sites. Of the 39 potential maritime archaic sites, 7 have been excavated and confirmed as such. And it's really those 7 that my research focus on. So, in the fall of 2011, Tony and Stephen we're looking for an interested researcher to analyze lithic and quartz assemblages from this early deep past of Labrador and Kamestastin. This was in order to develop a more formal classification system for quartz tools. It fit well with the type of project I wanted to work with the first people of Labrador. I wanted to kind of engage more heavily within a community-based type of archaeology that just kind of looks at multiple narratives. And I mean, I was always really interested in the interior, so it just kind of, they found me, I found them, whichever way you want to look at it. And so now I'm investigating the numerous and predominantly quartz assemblages of the earliest occupations of Kamestastin. So quartz is very common during this period, but a detailed analysis of this how it was used and what it can tell us about movement, acquisition, people's relationship to the land, and social life in general. It hasn't really received the same attention in Northeast archaeology as other types of raw material, just because it's more difficult to use and you tend to have lots and lots and lots of it. So in this context, my research at its very broadest level kind of looks at the interrelationship between site location, quartz, and lithic artifacts, and the lifeways of the early to late maritime archaic period at Kamestastin. So these are the sites, these are the 7 sites that I just spoke of, and I hope everyone can see it very clearly. Of these 7 sites, I have helped to excavate 3 of them. So those are what I consider, the ones that I consider to be my core group, just because I've had physical experience of excavating them and process the post-season laboratory analysis. So these would be Chelsee, with the Amishish Locus 3, although I include Locus 1 as well into this core group. It's, you'll hear about it in a second, and Jack Sama. But I do want to compare these 3 core sites to the other 4 that have been excavated prior, which is sediments, Kanawagatat, Nekamumemuvan, and Twamish. But you can see that the majority fall, almost all of them fall well within the conventional dates for the Maritime Archaic Chiwashinu, as we know them, except for perhaps Kanawagatat. But it does have, including this, might have an interesting kind of discussion on how quartz is being used and how we define these time periods in terms of artifacts. We do have a few strange dates that could happen for a variety of reasons. I'll highlight them now instead of later. So the first one is one of the dates for Chelsee. 4 out of the 5 are very nicely 6,700 years ago. 1 is 3,600. Considering it is barren land, barren ground, the soil is actually fairly thin before you get to the cultural layer. So we're looking at maybe 13 to 15 centimeters below surface before you stop seeing kind of the occupation of where people were living, which in contrast is fairly shallow. These sites are kind of in a living landscape, so not only humans but also large number of caribou go through there, or used to, and both Chelsee and Amishish are in caribou paths, or old caribou paths as well. So it's entirely possible that that date is a process of taphonomy where caribou walking by and they end up kicking in a piece of charcoal into the ground, and it was above our hearth and not necessarily within the context of the occupation. So we're feeling pretty confident with the 4 out of 5 being securely dating that site. And plus the other one. This one's hard blocked, so it was in the middle of the fire pit, and these 3 also come from the same type of context. So we feel confident that we're actually dating the fire pit of that occupation and not a random piece of charcoal. The other 2 kind of much later dates that we have here for Amishish are, we kind of think of the same context. They're much higher up, closer to the surface, and then not hearth locked, whereas the date that's much later, which is this 6,600 one, kind of was in the fire pit. So it's the same type of argument, but again, it depends on how you read the dates. Based on and you'll see in a moment, on the artifact assemblage, kind of it really does tie very closely into what we are finding in code, other dates that kind of go with the 6,700, 6,500, 6,300 frame. So we're pretty confident that those are just kind of charcoal that doesn't necessarily relate to the occupation event itself. I hope that made this slightly clearer. But an important part of my research recognizes archaeology as one part of the story of Kamestastin, the story that is kind of in the minds of people who go there. And because of this, my research attempts to perform where multiple narratives about the past and the land can be engaged with without creating a hierarchy that this is one above the other. So this research does explore how and to what extent the multiple narratives that are kind of linked to the use of quartz and people's relationship to the land, including kind of oral histories, personal experiences, and archaeology, how they overlap, how they evolve, how they change. And so far, 3 field seasons have been conducted and have been focused on collecting this qualitative and quantitative data through engaging in various aspects of interior life, such as hunting and travel and wood procurement. I have to admit, the hunting part, I was more of a very interested bystander, I don't think I'm very good at that yet. But I was a part of it in my own way. I was present and I think I helped afterwards. And I mean, this is also learning things that I wouldn't have known at all where to start. So processing caribou skins and doing that. How to pluck a goose, how to cook wild meat at Kamestastin that's prevalent. And it was with my friends and colleagues. It was actually it felt more of just a really nice way of being than collecting so much data, even though that was part of it. And of course, there was other parts of it, like interviews with community members on Northern Life and the Chiwashinu, so the Innu of old Innu from long ago. And this image here is actually an image of Mancheslo, telling Sylvester Jakovich, who was a translator at the time, about what her father used to do with quartz when she was a girl. So that's kind of what that image is. These images are from kind of talks that I did at the schools in Nafrashish and Shahidi. And this is an image of kind of one of the talks that we had in Nafrashish, where people could come and if they wanted to, they could see artifacts and share stories and talk about the place and about life in Richmond. Now, I mean, that photo is particularly empty of individuals, other than, you know, it was me taking a picture of an empty room, but actually people came, so just, okay, there were people there. And of course, you know, I've been collecting archaeological information through survey and test pitting and excavation, which I've already talked about a little bit, those 3 sites. So the purpose behind all of this, all of these methods, all of these different ways of looking at the story is to ensure that the research objectives kind of remain significant and relevant to everyone involved, and recognizing that there is an important relationship between the Inuit people and their land, and by extension to the past, because that's where these old places are. And there are protocols for, I'm talking to a number of people, and there are protocols for engaging or not engaging, more importantly, with these old campsites, because there is a level of respect. So, you know, it's part of it. So now I'm going to go very briefly over my 3, what I call core sites, because I was part of the excavation, so actually have first-hand information that I can provide. So the first is Jack Selma, and that was the first one that was the first old campsite that I kind of had the opportunity to kind of work on, and with Stephen Lorang and Tony Jenkinson in 2012. And this site was originally found by and named after Jack Selma from Chiadi in the fall of 1998, and was later revisited kind of in many surveys. And what was found was this nipple-based point made out of quartz. And this is a characteristic of really early kind of maritime archaic stuff that you find on the coast as well. So it kind of gave us the idea that maybe this is a really old site. And there was also kind of large amounts of quartz debutage, and some of this quartz crystal, and what we call smoky quartz, which just has basically pure glass with a purple tinge. This is just what looks like pure glass, but it's quartz. And then this dark gray chert, which we don't know really where it comes from or what we think, well, we know what they're doing with it, but not quite. So after the excavation, this is what revealed. So all the different colors are different types of material, and they're all kind of flakes. So when you're trying to make a tool or sharpening it, you end up hitting it and it kind of flakes off, and that's what you have all these different colors. Or I mean, you have all the different colors because I like color, but you have all these different pieces because there's lots of them. What we found was there was art. So here's that fire pit here, and a small number of tools. So 3 scrapers, 3 knives, and 1 potential microblade-like piece of smoky quartz. And we also noticed that there was a huge amount of quartz. So you can see here the numbers. Quartz dominates it quite heavily. I hope everybody can see. It's not this like 1,100 in comparison to like 92, which is the second highest. So it's the dominant material at Jack Selma. What we also noticed was that, so most of the tools are found in this area. A lot of the debutage is kind of nicely in this area. If you were to look along this axis past the hearth, what you end up looking over is several of the most important contemporary caribou crossings at Kamestastin, kind of today. Oh, that didn't work. So that's where the fireplace. That is the contemporary caribou crossing area at Kamestastin. Now this is contemporary, so you know it's a nice indication of what may be happening, but it's really difficult to prove that was the same caribou path. I mean, it stands to reason that it might be, but it did prove to be a very good lookout place because while we were digging, this is what we saw. So that's an interesting echo, I think. So Chelsee is the second of the 3 that I'm going to talk about, and Chelsee first was noticed kind of in the early surveys, and you see this is lower ground, and the entire area is just scattered with the discrete scatters of different types of material, raw mature quartz, a variety of different colored slates. And so it's been known for a while, but there was no formal tools or fire pits or campsites kind of that you could see on the surface. In 2012, Tony, myself, and Stephen Loring opened up 20 1 meter by 1 meter units, which showed that there was a small hearth. That would be that one there. With occasional patches of red ochre and surrounded by large quantities of quartz again, and the smaller quantities of different types of rama and slate and a number of quartz fragments. So this is a small assemblage that we kind of found in 2012. So again, it's fairly small in comparison to other larger sites along the coast. But people were very careful with their materials at Kamestastin. If they could use it again, or if it wasn't fully broken, they wouldn't throw it away. So in general, this is the type of assemblage that we would find. But we see we have very nice kind of slate knives, kind of ulu-like knives, some points, and these are all potentially, I'm pretty sure, but they're black-faced Rama knives. And then of course this red axe, which you'll notice kind of comes up again. So this is the colorful display of all the things that we found. You'll see that the blue parts are the quartz, and there's a lot in this area and a lot in this area. And this is the hearth, the fire pit that I was telling you about. So we did notice that there is kind of, in those two concentrations, the majority in this area tend to be associated, well, I mean, have traditionally been associated with hunting. So the knives and the arrowhead and the utilized flakes here. Not all of the artifacts are traditionally kind of, or conventionally kind of in that category, but the majority of them are. And around the fire pit, you find kind of those that are associated with wood cutting and animal processing and hide working and that kind of thing. Now, at the time that this was excavated in 2012, it was unclear how these two activity areas related to each other. But we did get a number of charcoal samples from the fire pit. 3 actually. Those are the 3 really nicely clustered 6,700 dates that I showed earlier. At the same time, we collected the entire contents of the fire pit, and I later brought it back to MUN and processed it using flotation. And it actually produced some really surprising results, because flotation can help you isolate those kind of really old berries or charred plants and bone. And we found some really interesting things. We didn't find too many berries so far, but we did find kind of small mammal, could be caribou, porcupine, otter, whatever's in the area at the time. We found some freshwater fish. Couldn't identify the species level, but we found some fish, another eating fish, which stands to reason. And then we found, this is the surprising one, so we found sea urchin, and it was burnt. So it must have been at the time, it must have been thrown into the fire at the same time that it was being used. But we're about 120, 130 kilometers from the coast. So we're not quite sure how or why they started bringing this in, but it's very interesting. We wouldn't have found it if we hadn't done the flotation. It also prompted us to kind of bulk sample all of the hearths from these early time periods to see what we find. Maybe we'll find something similar, or not. It could be a one-off event, or it could be something that we just didn't know that was happening because we didn't know that we're supposed to look there. That sounds pretty good, but anyways. So in 2013, Tony and I went back to Chelsee, and we dug another 4 units. So it'd be these 4 here. We were going to dig more, but Chelsee being low kind of elevation and a fairly flat terrace was often covered in snow until about towards the tail end of our field season. So we started, and then shortly thereafter we lost the ice. It became unstable, or relatively unstable, so we couldn't walk across it back and forth, and we couldn't take the canoe across the little portages. So we had to call the season. But in those 4 units, we found some really interesting information. So here you'll see that there's this darkened area is actually another hearth, which these stones are probably associated with. And we found some more artifacts that kind of link into the artifact assemblage that we had. So there's kind of some half-moon-shaped knives and so the ulu-like knives, and some quartz kind of scrapers. And we also found 2 dates. So those are the 2. One date is the 6,700, which is kind of associated with the fire pit, and the other is at 3,600, which you think might have been not associated with the occupation per se. So, on to the final one. Oh wait, I'm sorry, I went too quickly. So the dates from these two hearths are very close together, but they could represent a number of different things. It could be two groups of people occupying the same space at the same time, at different points in the year, kind of at going to the same place over a number of years. Could be older or younger wood, or what we're thinking through right now, because it has an echo again, was that it could be possibly associated with differential hearth use. So potentially there's a protocol associated with how to kind of handle remains, because this second hearth didn't have any calcined bone, and this is kind of what you were used to finding broken, burnt bone in hearths in general at Kamestastin. It's one of the few sites where we have two hearths at the same site, which potentially could date to the same time period. So it's interesting that we only have one hearth that's filled with bone, and the other that isn't. And this is the practice that we actually see in historic and in present-day contexts among the Innu, where animal remains are disposed of in fire pits indoors, following, working with or kind of processing the animal remains. And usually it's one individual or one family that takes that job on. But I mean, whether or not that's the case is an interesting echo that we might see in the archaeology. So now on to the final one, which is Witiamishish. So this is this photo is looking south, so this way. Chelsee is kind of over here, I think. And this is Witiamishish. This is another site in Nakamune movement that's part of the 7 that I'm looking at, but not the ones that I've excavated per se. And Witiamishish was investigated by Tony in 2010 because there was a variety of quartz and slate and Roma debutage kind of on the surface. We knew somebody was there, but we didn't know when or what they were doing. So he decided to open up a couple units to figure out what was going on. And it just happened that the first unit he opened up was directly on a fire pit, which had this point kind of in it. So when he opened it up, it was again a smaller assemblage. It was this right-sized assemblage for Kamestastin, but large quantities of quartz. It produced a date of 6,300, and you see we even have this nice nipple-based point. So that's kind of characteristic of the Maritime Archaic period as well. And back here, there were still kind of scatters of quartz, Rama, and slate on that surface. So in 2012, we went back. So myself, Tony, and Snurna Piwash from Natushish went and we took a look at the site. And we actually found a larger campsite with a hearth. And this is actually a calcined bone deposit, so that burnt, crushed bone. We found a lot of it in a pit, potentially, right there. We also found, again, that red slate celt, which is really nice, that red slate axe. We found kind of almost exactly the same, or very, very similar to the one at Chelsee that I showed earlier. And again, we have these nice, like, ovate knives. These ones actually have holes in them, which was something that we'd never seen before at Kamestastin, so that was really kind of an interesting thing. This is the assemblage altogether, and it's interesting because it's like almost dominated by these knives, these types of knives. Maybe not all of them had holes, but these ones don't fit together, or at least we haven't been able to find a way that they do, and they couldn't be different broken knives. This one you can actually see once did have a hole, but then might have been broken, and they kind of sharpened this edge instead. And this is a very, very small one. It looks quite like it, quite like these kind of curved, moon-shaped knives that we don't know. Some quartz knives and potentially the bases of knives as well. I think the red slate kelp. So this is our distribution. As you can see, again, we have a heavy dominance of quartz. It's really quite a lot of quartz in this area. And the fire pit there. So all the stars are different artifacts, and all the small pieces in different colors are different types of rock that have been flaked off, either making a tool or sharpening a tool, or accidents happen and you drop them or they break, whatever the case may be. But despite like the fascinating quantity of these like slate like knives and fragments at the site, the assemblage has very small amounts of debutage, of flakes from both the slate artifacts, or any slate in general, and Rama. So that kind of leads us to think that the tools themselves were made somewhere else and brought to the site and then resharpened as necessary. Whereas opposed to the large amounts of quartz and the quartz cores that we found, which might kind of show us that people were finding it locally and bringing it back and making it as necessary, as needed, or because they want to. So just to really briefly recap on the three sites, they do share a lot of similarities, despite not just their age. They tend to be more ephemeral, so they're relatively smaller. They're probably associated with seasonality. Maybe smaller groups of people. They're all early dated, and they're dominated by quartz, really dominated by quartz. And they're also similar to other places on the coast. So this is from Kubelik Island, north of Maine. It's just one example. But you see there's that kind of half-moon shaped knife that I've been showing. This one even has the hole in it. You have the nibble-based point, and this red shaded red slate axe or kilt. So there are very big similarities, and dominated by quartz. So this is just the raw numbers of the amount of quartz that I'll be looking at, and trying to figure out what people were doing with it, where they were, why they were choosing it, how does it relate to people's lives, and I'm in the process of doing that now. That's good as far as I can tell you about that. And this is our team. So this is Fiona Piwash, Anthony Jenkinson, Stephen Mooring, myself, and then our two guard dogs. Vice Bruce Poker guarded us very, very diligently in 2012. And then Benjamin took up the job in 2013. It was actually very impressive when did it because he's about to stake, and he thinks that he's bigger than the bear. So it was quite an interesting, a little bit fraught at the beginning, and then it was like, yeah, we totally believe you can do it. And these are all the people that have helped since 2012. There's been a lot more people involved prior to when I joined, but these are the people that I know for sure. And of course, all of you today for coming, and again, the Labrador Institute Speaker Series and the Newfoundland and Labrador Archaeological Society for, inviting me here today. Questions? Yeah.
Not quite clear what you meant when you said that the habitation was both continuous and episodic. Seems contradictory.
Okay, fair. It's continuous as in that people have been going back to Kamestastin for a long time, from very, very early to today. It doesn't always mean that they're going every year or even every 1,000 years. It's just there's a lot of kind of overlap. There's a lot of sites, and they date from a variety of different periods. We have the most amount of sites that we have are from very early and from the more present. So.
Yes. So those knife and axe fragments and so on, how do they work? Is that a very if you took an axe like that, looks like it'd break apart pretty easily.
You would probably have it as the way that the axe head would be today, where you would kind of have an up and down chopping motion. It would probably be something where, say, my arm is the stick and my fingers are the axe, and probably be at kind of a different angle, so you get more kind of strength in it. And I mean, we do find broken bits of like little tiny flakes where they were probably using it because it would flake off, and you would have to sharpen it regularly. So they probably were much bigger to begin with, and then over time, kind of because it looks fairly complete, but it's actually probably because it was reduced in size until it was too small to actually use.
And would they have just found the rock and it just looked right, or would they have? Would there be? How do they make those tools? Like what?
Well, the knives that you're talking about and the axe that you're talking about are ground. So the stone itself, when you find it at first, even in the ground, it's a softer stone. So you have to be very careful when you're digging it, because once it's a little bit soft, it's almost malleable. You can break it very easily. As to why they would use it, knife, it's actually it can be very sharp, and it's a very good cutting knife for different types of material. Why they would choose that material is, it could be learned. It could be something that's passed on. It absolutely is something that's passed on. But where it first kind of started probably has echoes from before kind of coming to Labrador. And they find the type of material that's kind of what you need to get that ground edge, to be able to make tools from that method, and you just kind of, that's what you do.
Mm.
Yeah.
Thanks for the talk, Chelsea. It was really interesting. My question has to do with some things you talked about at the beginning.
Sure.
I'm sort of interested in how the archaeological record that you described tonight connects with the community narratives that you also mentioned at the very beginning of the talk. So maybe you haven't gotten quite to that part of the project yet, but if you could just tell us a little more about how the material artifacts connect with some of the community narratives that you're hearing.
Well, I have been doing some of that research since 2012, really more concretely last year, and I mean it's not described in the same way that I described it tonight, but it is part of living memory, where people are telling me about how they recognize certain forms or even the actual kind of material and what it's been used for and how it's been used. And it links up a lot with what we're finding in the archaeological record. Well, always, I'm not sure, but I mean, there is a lot of echoes in that. So, for example, on my way back from Natushish, I was talking with one of my friends, Shwashi Nui, and he was telling me how when he saw those half-moon-shaped knives with the holes in it, he was like, I don't remember seeing one when I was a kid, but I remember hearing my dad talk about him using that type of knife. You know, so it's linking up in that way. And there's also other stories to do with these, because they're not just tools; they're part of a much wider kind of network of stories and experiences, and not just animals and humans, but also beings.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question? Sure. The artifacts kind of tell us what people did. Do they also tell us, maybe in conjunction with some of the stories you're hearing from people, do they also tell us about who did things? Like, in other words, men did these types of tasks, women did these, maybe kids did other things. I mean, can you kind of start with your artifacts, connect them with the stories people tell about them, and the way they echo in their memories and so on, to kind of say a little more about what was the social division of labor and things like that?
People have done that, and I mean, I can see how that could happen. For my purposes, I'm interested in just seeing what are the different narratives, and if they do kind of connect, that's great, and if they don't, that's great too. So I don't remember people talking about gender divisions or things between kids and adults. But I would imagine that a lot of the time people would be doing a lot of different things, and I don't know. I'm not sure. I'll have to look into it more.
Thank you.
What led you to Labrador?
That's a good question. I started off my research not in Canada. I started off, even though I'm Canadian and I've only ever gone to Canadian institutions for education, I kind of looked at European and British archaeology prior to coming, and I was really interested in peoples that are connected in the deep past by large bodies of water. I mean, that's a little bit of an understatement when you're thinking the Atlantic Ocean is a large body of water, but it is. It's how people are connected by this water, and so I kind of had an idea of what was happening in the Baltic Sea, an idea what was happening in the Irish Sea and the English Channel, and then I was like, well, what's happening on the northeastern Atlantic side of things at the same time period? And that kind of brought me here, and then I was just very lucky to have been in the right place at the right time when Tony and Stephen and the Archaeological Initiative Kamestastin were looking for somebody to kind of ask the kind of questions that I'm asking.
You mentioned that today it's practice to burn caribou bones fire indoors. Is that suggest, or just wanted, does that suggest the same practice at that time And these farms, are they inside or outside?
Well, I mean, we have no indication of where the boundaries are for the tents or anything like that in the archaeology of it. So it's really not something that I can say. I'm only saying there's an echo from something that we know that's happened kind of in the recent time, and that it looks quite similar to this, but it may not be this. You know, there's a variety of reasons for what it could be, but it's an interesting echo to have.
In recent times, this way to dispose of the bones, is that?
That's still disposing the bones in fire pits or now kind of stoves is still a practice for sure. Whether or not it's still kind of one fireplace, I'm not sure.
Does that necessarily take place indoors today, or is that just how it happens?
Well, I mean, I'm only relating what I've been told or what I've read, so I'm not entirely sure what happens all the time, you know.
Can you tell them very much difference between, like, if you have a 3,000-year-old site and a 6,000-year-old site? Can you tell if there's been very much change in the habits and what's happening? Like, has there been? Can you, if you didn't do carbon dating, could you identify a site from? Has something changed?
Well, for sure. I mean, especially when you're looking at that kind of potentially that time depth. People tend to evolve or change their artifacts, the way that they use different types of stone, or what types of stone they use more than others, or how they make them. Even the same type of thing, like a spear point or a projectile point, changes over time. Sometimes you find a different way, or you find a better way, or and so it does change over time. And you can do it just when you have sites like this where they're dominated by quartz. If all you have is the quartz, it's harder to figure it out. That's why quartz hasn't been looked at as much because you have a lot of it and it's harder to look at.
And the sites, can you tell what season they would have been in?
Well, this is why we do flotation and so on, because it does give us an idea of what animals were around when they were at the campsites. It doesn't give us there's other ways of doing it as well, but you might be able to find berries or different types of trees, any kind of indication that what's going on with different types of bugs. If you find kind of rats or rodents or anything that has kind of in their teeth, they end up having indications of what season they potentially. So it's or more importantly, what environment it was like. So whether it was cold or hot. But it depends on what you can find.
Chelsee?
Yeah.
I just want to chip in on,
please.
On that question.
Oh, this is Tony Jenkinson.
You can always do this, and Chelsee, you can pick up on this and run with it if you want to. But, where people establish these sites is a pretty good indicator too of what season. Vegetative, for example, is inland by a swamp. If you were to put a tent there in the fly season, you would be carried away. I mean, it's horrible in the summertime, but it's very nice. It's very nice cold weather shelter spot in late fall and winter. There's two sites out on the main lake that Chelsee mentioned and talked a lot about. Chedrock is very exposed to south and west. Beautiful place for when the flies are out and you're getting wind off the lake, and it's sheltered from behind for even for spring storms. I think we can show in the pictures. There's a little rocky block right behind the site. Anyway, sorry, I went on, but I just want to say that's another way to guess or pick up when people were there, what season they were there.
Yeah, I had that in my slides and I took it out kind of earlier on. So I was like, I'm a little bit long, so I'll just keep that out until somebody asks me the question and then I forgot to answer. Yes.
Just one more quick question.
Yeah, of course.
Can you tell me what kinds of things you see on the land in the first place that encourage you to excavate in an area? Like
Well, Kamestastin is an interesting place because the caribou do a lot of the work for us. You know, because when they walk through, they tend to kick up some of the dirt, and because it's fairly shallow. You know, in the larger kind of narrative archaeology, it's a fairly shallow kind of deposition, I guess, or just how things are buried. That when they're walking, over time they will kick up things that will say, "Hey, somebody's been here," and sometimes they'll drag it along, and sometimes it's actually just exactly where it was. So they do a lot of the work. But then you have, you know, if you know what's been found before, where it's been found, what type of places that those types of sites are usually associated with, you can test to see, even if you don't see anything on the ground, or you think this would be a great camping spot, and people have been in the area, and so there are different ways of doing it. At Kamestastin, we happen to have this living record, and every year something new shows up, even though you walk the same kind of path every day and you've never seen, you know, this one piece of quartz, and then suddenly the next year you show up and the first day you're just like, when did this get here? You know, so it's a different kind of thing, and shows us what it wants when it wants.
Can I just mention something? Like a lot of, if you're wondering about like the Innu and how they hunt and how they like clean things, if you go on innustories.ca, it basically gives like videos and stuff for like the whole year through, and like what they do in different parts of the years and how they use the tools to like get the stuff off the caribou hide and stuff like that, and how they smoke it. So like a lot of little questions and stuff like that. I know that innustories.ca answers a lot of that and how they do things. It's a good resource.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right, well, there's no more questions. I'll say thanks to Chelsea, and thanks to everybody for coming out to watch. And there's hot water and tea and coffee and cookies there, so help yourselves if you want to stick around for a little bit. And thanks.
Thanks for having me.